Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Humanities Festival. My name is Frey. I'm with the Vienna newspaper Der Standard, and I'm delighted to introduce to you Professor Michael Ignatieff, renowned historian, author, novelist, commentator for many years from Canada, but lived also in Britain and in the US. Then went into politics in his homeland, in his home country, Canada. Was the leader of the Liberal Party when it was in opposition. Afterwards went to teach at Harvard University, and in 2016 took on the job to become a rector of the Central European University, the university founded by George Soros in Budapest after the end of communism, and which got a very excellent reputation during its lifetime. And what most people, and probably he also thought, was a cushy job before retirement, put him into the eye of a political storm as Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his Fidesz has tried since 2017 to close, restrict the CEU with every legal and regulative means. And this has become one of the big political battles in Europe, because the current case of the European Union, also based on Article 7, which triggered by now the European Parliament against Hungary, is one of the main cases held against Hungary is its treatment or its campaign against the CEU. And it is even more than that, because this not only the relationship between Hungary and the EU will to some extent depend on the fate of the CEU, but this is widely seen also as the big battle in Europe between nationalistic populism and liberal internationalism, ideology and movement, and a group of ideas which is perfectly represented by Michael Ignatieff all his life. So it's a great honor to have you here. Talk about the struggle for academic freedom in Hungary, but also beyond. And I would just like to start to get an idea where your own struggle to keep the Central European University CEU open stands right now. What do you think, a year from now, will the CEU still be based in Budapest?
I certainly hope so. That has been the commitment. It's a little difficult to say that in Vienna, of course, because Vienna has gone out of its way to welcome the possibility of us coming, and I can confirm that we will have a campus in Vienna effective September 2019, and there are a lot of people in this room have helped that to happen, and it's nice to be wanted. You know, I went to see the rector of the University of Vienna yesterday. He said, "Willkommen," you know, and everywhere we go, the city of Vienna, the federal government of Austria, the chancellor, we've had a terrific welcome from Austria. It's certainly a different feeling tone from the feeling we have in Budapest. So it's a little hard to explain in a welcoming city why we still want to maintain a place in Budapest. Some of it's just stubbornness, some of it's pride, and some of it's just a deep commitment to the idea that our vocation, academic freedom, it's most important to defend that precisely where it's most in danger. And I think that we want to maintain a base in Budapest. We'd like to have a campus in Vienna, a base in Budapest, and even at this late hour, we think it's just possible.
What will it depend on, whether you succeed or not?
Well, I keep being asked to enter the mind of the Prime Minister of Hungary, and that's not a place I like to go, because he's a master strategist, and I can only imagine what's on his mind. What do I think it depends on? I think it depends a little bit on the Americans. I think it depends on whether the Americans succeed in persuading the Hungarian government that it's really a bad idea to throw an American university out of a European state, a really bad idea to throw it out of a NATO ally. There's some geostrategic issues, in other words. The Americans have made it very clear that they would like CEU to remain in Budapest. That's important. I'm talking about the Trump administration. I'm not, we are grateful for that support. And then the question becomes how much that matters to the Hungarians. So that's number one. Number two, and here it's a little more ambiguous, whether European countries weigh in. The European Commission has been very helpful. We have legal processes in front of the European Court of Justice challenging the legality and constitutionality of this legislation. But frankly, what we need right now is for Chancellor Kurz and President Macron and Chancellor Merkel and people, where they meet the Prime Minister, to just have a little quiet word. This is about politics. All we need is a little quiet word. And the word would essentially be about this. The widest implication here, I think, is about the tradition of Christian democracy in Europe. I'm a liberal, and one of the illusions liberals have always had about post-war Europe is that we built post-war Europe. It's all down to us. We were the ones who created liberal democracy. We were the ones who created the human rights regimes. This is not right. Europe was built after the Second World War by Christian democratic leaders like de Gasperi in Italy, Adenauer in Germany, Franz Joseph Strauss, yes, conservative Austrian politicians, conservative European politicians like de Gaulle. And what's the issue now is whether the Prime Minister of Hungary is consistent with that tradition of Christian democracy, or whether he goes to a very different Christian democracy that is essentially puts in question Christian democracy's commitment to the rule of law and academic freedom.
Do you think
this is the big choice, and he has to make it, and that's why CEU has become important, because it's a kind of moment at which you have to choose which Christian democracy, which conservatism you believe in Europe. And that's why if I was only a political scientist watching this, I think this is really interesting. Unfortunately, I'm right in the center of it.
Now, has the recent vote in the European Parliament to launch Article 7 procedure against Hungary helped your case, or has it maybe even hurt it? And would maybe a suspension or expulsion from the European People's Party also help the future of the CEU?
Well, we've never, I used to be a politician, but I know the difference between being a politician and a university president, so I've never called for Hungary to be, Article 7. Is that a verb? To be Article 7 a country? Anyway, I've never called for that and would never do so. That's for elected politicians to do. That's not my job. And I've never recommended, either in private or in public, that the EPP throw anybody out of anywhere. That's, again, not my job. All I can say is that the decision of Chancellor Kurz and Manfred Weber to vote in favor of Article 7 proceedings was a very important demonstration by those political leaders and by their political traditions that there is a meaning of Christian democracy, a commitment to constitutionality, a commitment to the rule of law, and a commitment to academic freedom that Mr. Orbán doesn't appear to understand or doesn't appear to respect. And so in that sense, it was a symbolically very important decision. But that was not your question. Your question is what consequences it will have. And again, it requires me to enter the mental space of the Hungarian Prime Minister, and I don't have any idea. There are some people who think it will redouble it will contribute to his further radicalization. I don't know. I think I'm allowed to say I think that would be a shame, because if it contributes to his radicalization, I have to move an entire university across the national frontier to this city. And while I love this city, I ask you to have some sympathy for how difficult it is to move an entire university across a national frontier. And let me finally point out what a bloody scandal that would be. To be in a situation where a European member state succeeds in forcing a perfectly respectable, actually pretty damn good university out of the capital city of a European nation state. That's not good. That's not a good sign for Europe. So you should welcome us, and I hope you will welcome us, and you have welcomed us. But if we have to come here because we're pushed out, it's a very bad story about the continent you're proud to be part of.
What do you think, what motivates Orbán and his Fidesz party? Why are they targeting the CEU?
Again, I'm hesitant to enter into the mental space involved here, but it's clearly a purely political matter. Yeah. There has never been, what is odd about our situation is that we've just been reaccredited by Hungarian educational authorities for another 5 years. They think we're a pretty good university. So it's not about education. It's not about what we teach. It's simply that we are funded and supported by George Soros. It's a straight personal battle between Mr. Orbán and Mr. Soros. We have been taken hostage in service of a political vendetta. I don't think there's any other way to describe this. I can't, I've been in politics. I'm a realist. People have very personal battles and they fight them, fine.
But there have been...
Just don't take a university hostage in the process.
But there have been other moves too by the Hungarian government against academic institutions, against the Academy of Science. So there seems to be a larger pattern against the academic freedom going on in Hungary.
Yes, and I think that's important for this audience to understand. I mean, let me just say something else, because sometimes I'm proud of the battle we've fought to stay in Budapest, and I'm proud of my university, but two things are important. First of all, we feel we're battling or fighting on behalf of Hungarian higher education in general and the scientific community in Hungary in general, and the most important support we've received have been from our fellow Hungarian institutions. The Hungarian Academy of Sciences, founded in the 19th century, one of the great academic institutions in Europe, has had its funding cut and put under effective political control, so that one of the key parts of academic freedom is peer-reviewed scientific allocation of research funding on scientific criteria alone. And that is being deliberately cut back in the policies of the government towards the Academy of Science. And we have criticized that, and we think this will damage the immense prestige of Hungarian science. Secondly, there have been moves to stop teaching, to make it impossible to have gender studies taught in Hungary, and this seems to us to be absurd. Gender studies is a controversial discipline, a critical discipline, but few disciplines have done more to transform our understanding of human identity in the last generation than gender studies. So, of course, we will continue gender studies, but it's getting difficult for Hungarian institutions to do so. So, the final aspect of this is that the Hungarian government has passed legislation criminalizing anything that promotes migration or refugee settlement. And this poses a very direct challenge to academic freedom, because it raises the question, can you teach migration as an academic subject in a country where there is a criminal penalty for advocacy of migration? No institution, reputable institution, advocates a particular policy, but we study and evaluate policies, hopefully in an objective manner, and the question is whether we can actually do that. And the penalties, if we fall foul of that law, are substantial. A 25% levy on the budget costs of those programs, and potentially on the entirety of my academic budget. So we've had to suspend certain of these programs while we clarify the risk we run if we continue. Now that's just a very direct intrusion on academic freedom. I don't think there's an academic institution in Austria that thinks for 1 minute about whether they can teach, the political economy and political sociology of migration. You just get up and do it. But in Hungary, 2 hours from here, you have to think very carefully whether you can get away with it or whether you're going to face a penal fine. So these are some examples of the stuff that's happening. But let me just say one final thing. In the next room, there is a woman giving a talk whose husband is in jail in Turkey, right? So it's extremely important for us to remember that Hungary is not the only place where human freedoms and academic freedoms are jeopardized. Hungary is, in fact, in many respects, a free society compared to what's happening in Turkey or what's happening in China or what's happening in Russia. We need to see this in big global terms, and I never want to exaggerate. I want you, as the Americans say, to feel my pain, but let's not exaggerate. Let's keep this in very firm context. There's a much tougher story in the next room.
There has been more public support for the CEU than probably Viktor Orbán expected, and maybe even you. There have been demonstrations and a lot of. Is there more power in to the civil society opposing Orbán than it's sometimes given credit here in outside or even in Hungary? Do you see any hope of a positive backlash?
Well, I've been in and out of universities all my life, and I do think the most moving single moment in my life, and I think there are some members of our faculty here, CEU faculty here, who will remember this vividly. There was I think it was a Sunday, and was it May 2017, when 70,000 people walked past our windows chanting free universities in a free society. You have to be made of stone not to be moved by that. So we had enormous support at that period. I think the situation since then has changed. Mr. Orbán has won a very convincing electoral victory in April. He won a democratic election. You may not like it, you may have questions about the election, but he won it fair and sort of square. The opposition to him is very divided and very discouraged. The civil society movements are under very, very great pressure from some of the legislation I've described. So the situation has changed. I don't feel that, I think it's important to remember that, it's funny, sometimes people say to me, do you feel safe in Budapest? I think, what are you talking about? Budapest is incredibly welcoming. There isn't a day in which we don't have a taxi driver or somebody going when you go to your bakery who says, keep going, keep fighting. We have enormous sense of solidarity and affection and friendship from our the citizens with whom we live. But that's not the same thing as can civil society mobilization change Viktor Orbán's mind?
Now,
he is very responsive to public opinion, but it would take a pretty big demonstration to crack this, and we can't organize demonstrations and never would. It's not appropriate for a university, but I don't want to make predictions about what would happen if this, and I don't want to urge confrontation with the government. That would not be wise.
Now, I understand that it's still now, the future is still up in the air. You need some kind of agreement by December in order to be able to accept new students next year. If this deal is not reached, if Orbán does not accept it, is this then the end of the CEU in Budapest?
Well, the situation is, under the law that we are trying to get changed, CEU cannot accept new students after the 1st of January 2019. That's in about 2 months, something like that. If I can't get the government to change course in about the next month, I'm going to have to accept the entire incoming class of our master's and doctoral schools to Vienna, effective September 2019. We're a very small place, by the way. We have about 1,800 students. They come from 90 countries. We are exclusively a master's and doctoral school. We're a little mouse compared to the elephant of the University of Vienna or other the great institutions in Vienna. But we would have to accept between 600 and 700 students in Vienna effective September 2019 if I can't get this legislation changed in about the next month.
And this would be, the CEU would still continue in Budapest, but as an empty shell, and Vienna would be the main campus? Is this right?
Well, the legislation allows us to continue serving people who are already in the restaurant, but we can't take any new people into the restaurant, so that the university could continue to offer our US accredited degrees. We're also accredited in Hungary, and there is some legal question about whether we could continue to operate our Hungarian accredited degrees. So my view is that even if we have to have our entire incoming class come to Vienna in September 2019, we would continue teaching operations in Budapest in some form. And if we, as it were, come to Vienna, we will always maintain a base in Budapest. Those of you who know our campus know it's right in the historic heart of the downtown. It's staggeringly beautiful. What's ironic about this is our building has just been nominated as one of the 4 best new buildings built in the world. You know, I'm sitting, it really makes me cry to think that that place might be, you know, not fulfilling an educational function as we would wish in September 2019. But The other thing to say, which is important, is that there is no existential threat to the future of the university. One of the remarkable features about this story is we are not bleeding out, as they say in America. I am able to hire new faculty. They are coming on board. We are not losing some of our very senior and distinguished faculty. They are staying, and we are still able to recruit students from around the world. So this is a university under attack, but it is not a university that is dying. It's a university actually that's come through this extremely well. And we look forward to expanding and growing in Vienna next year.
So if there is an agreement before the end of the year, but will the Vienna operation also just make any sense? Or is it just kind of a lifeboat, a life insurance, because you never know what will happen in Mr. Orbán's mind?
It would be insulting to Vienna for Vienna to think of itself as a lifeboat. No, we do not want to be...
Better than a sinking tanker, isn't it, a ship?
None of these no. Drop all the metaphors.
Okay.
The boat is not sinking. We don't need a lifeboat. We would not also be a university in exile. I don't like any of that. If we come to Vienna, and we will come to Vienna in all circumstances. I want to make that clear again. Whatever Mr. Orbán does, we think it's in our interest to have a campus in Vienna and for us to grow in Vienna. For all the reasons that you understand, this is an international financial center, it's an international organization center, it's an international center of research and teaching and learning. I mean, we'd be crazy not to be here, and I sometimes wonder why it's taken us so long to get here. So whatever Mr. Orbán does, we want to be in Vienna. The question is whether it's a campus or the campus. That's the only remaining issue that needs to be decided.
It will be exciting 2 months, then also for Vienna to watch what's going to happen here in Hungary. I would like to, since the topic of this talk is the struggle for academic freedom, also in general terms, let's look beyond Hungary for a moment. I mean, you mentioned Turkey. Do you see academic freedom as such? Is it under attack? Is it under pressure more now than it was like 5 or 10 years ago?
It's, I've had, to put it mildly, a non-standard academic career. I've never, for example, had a sabbatical. I'm extremely envious. All these people get sabbaticals. Anyway, if you had asked me 5 years ago what I thought academic freedom was, I would have said it's tenure for professors. That is, it's an individual right. It's the fact that once you're Once you pass a certain barrier, you cannot be fired. It's a protection for the individual rights of a faculty member. I now see academic freedom as both that individual freedom, but also a collective freedom for institutions to set their priorities within the limits of the law. In other words, it's about the institutional autonomy of the community of scholars. And it traces back to some of the oldest ideas of freedom we have in Europe, because many of our universities are over 1,000 years old, and they were self-governing communities of scholars, Paris, Salamanca, Bologna, etc. And I think, to your question, it used to be the case that the threats to democracy that we worried about were threats to the freedom of the press and threats to the independence of the judiciary. And I think in the last couple of years, suddenly threats to the autonomy of universities and the independence of universities have come to the fore in two dimensions. One of them is, I think, a broad cultural trend that relates to the fact that we're living through the biggest technological change since Gutenberg in how knowledge is disseminated and reproduced and passed along. We're in the middle of a Gutenberg revolution which has destabilized the authority systems that allocate and determine what knowledge is. And it's not surprising that the university is in the middle of this. We have here, every one of us, the Library of Alexandria in our pockets. And it has a radically destabilizing effect on the authority that universities have taken for granted. That's one phenomenon. The second phenomenon, equally serious, is that through my entire adult life, the story that universities told was that we are the solution to the inequality problem. Get students postgraduate or graduate education, and that's how we deal with the inequality problem in a liberal society. And so access, improving access, lowering the barriers to university education has been an enormous social project for Europe and North America since the 60s. And now in 2018, we turn around and discover that far from being the solution to the inequality problem, we are widely and increasingly and sometimes plausibly regarded as one of the causes of the problem. We are the reproducers of what could be called credentialed inequality. We allocate, through our qualification system, the ticket of entry to every middle-class job and every skilled job in the economy. And because of the stagnation of real wages among industrial workers, the economic transformation of work, we are increasingly resented as the gatekeepers of an unequal system of privilege that reproduces and makes inequality worse. And so these two changes are destabilizing our relationship to the political system. In the Brexit debate, you'll be aware of this, one of the Brexit campaigners said, "We've had enough of experts," famous remark. All the academic experts during the Brexit debate basically said, "Are you nuts? Are you seriously telling me you want to leave the European Union? All our expertise tells you that's shooting yourself in the head or the foot or whatever." And large amounts of the British population who do not have university education said, "I don't care what you tell us. You're part of the problem, not part of the solution." And the biggest divider, as we all know, these are facts you all know, the biggest predictor of how you would vote in the Brexit referendum was levels of schooling. people who did not have a university education voted massively to exit the European Union, even when they were told by experts it will hurt you economically, right? Those with university degrees basically voted to stay. These are problems that everybody who works in universities needs to think about hard. Our authority as the holders, legitimizers, validators of knowledge is in question as never before. And secondly, we are seen as part of the reproduction of a socially unjust system. And we in university life have to step up and deal with those problems as best we can. But that's, it seems to me, why academic freedom is suddenly in question, because people think, what have you guys done for us lately, actually? You're in another world of privilege. Your knowledge is alien to us. We have our own sources of knowledge. We're tired of being shut out, tired of being excluded. Having said all that, I'm extremely proud of being in universities. I wouldn't be anywhere else, and I think we've got a good story to tell back, which is in a world in which that is undergoing a Gutenberg revolution.
When you ask
The
conservatives,
validation of knowledge by a university is more important than ever. I could go on.
when you ask conservatives or even traditional liberals, maybe also at Harvard, about the challenges and to academic freedom, they will also point to certain trends, leftist trends in social sciences, where some issues are no longer be addressed, where books are no longer be allowed. Is this a serious problem?
I think it's
more of a
I think I'm an old free speech liberal, but I'm sitting in my own university, and I'm proud of our university, and I love our university. But I invited Roger Scruton, a prominent conservative intellectual, who has views in particular about gender and about homosexuality that I think are, how can I put it politely, nuts. But he's a serious guy. He has a philosophical position that is entitled to be heard and is entitled to be respected. When he stood up to talk in my university in a full hall, 60 students walked out rather than listen to him. That's a problem. I can't stop the students going, and I had many dialogues with the students before Scruton came to make the simple point that when you put somebody on a platform, you're not validating either their life or all their views. This issue of platforming, to platform is to endorse, seems to me to be the death of free speech. We have to, in a university, we have an enormous social role in providing a platform for a range of views in social debate that are crucial to the maintenance of a free society. And we are, to get to your point, we are justly criticized by conservatives, by other people, that we only want to hear what we want to hear. And that I would add that as the third element of the challenge to academic freedom, to which we have to get our house in order. I had a conference at CEU in June 2017 and invited to that conference an old friend of mine who introduced a conservative speaker at Middlebury College in the United States, and she was assaulted and given a concussion, so that when she appeared in Budapest 3 months later, she was still wearing dark glasses because she couldn't, because of the concussion effects. What the hell is happening? I know Middlebury College. It's an excellent undergraduate institution in which they invited a conservative speaker, and he was shouted down, and she was hit so badly she suffered a concussion. This is the kind of stuff that is providing ammunition on the conservative side, and frankly, until we fix that, the conservatives and people hostile to universities have actually a very good argument.
So what can academics, scholars, and those who also believe in free speech and the future of an independent academic world do now to defend these values and their institutions?
Well, I think we need to reach out. We need to provide. We are in very polarized, very divided societies. Everywhere I go, universities are saying, should I invite an AFD person to a platform at a university? In this country, presumably, you have very urgent issues about whether you should invite people who vote for what are called the far-right parties to university gatherings. My view of that as an old free speech liberal is that the line about who gets to make a case in a university is relatively simple and relates to whether you are prepared to defend in all circumstances the constitutional order, namely whether you're prepared or not prepared to use violence in pursuit of political ends. Anybody who advocates violence in the pursuit of any political end does not get into a university that I'm part of. Okay, that would be how I would make the choice. But I was having a discussion this morning about, in the wake of Chemnitz, you know, the events in Chemnitz, where I would have said, of course you invite AFD to a platform in a university. They were saying, now wait a minute, AFD was involved in the organization of political violence in Chemnitz. So there's an empirical question about whether the people you're inviting are on the right side of the violence, non-violence divide. But that's how I would deal with it. But in a wider sense, we have to have a talk about this. I have to engage with students. I have wonderful gay students, students of various sexual orientations, who do feel genuinely insulted. Their dignity as human beings is insulted if I bring to a platform someone who has certain views about gender and sexual orientation. In other words, for them, it's not just an expression of views or opinions, it's an attack on them as persons. And so we have to engage with that. We can't just say, oh, my dear, you're somehow mistaken. You know, I can't keep saying to them, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. So what's your problem about hearing someone who's saying something you find repellent or ugly? We all know that words are deeply hurtful, right? So these are the deeper issues where we have to have a conversation. I felt my students were wrong to walk out from Roger Scruton, but I, as a university president, feel a deep obligation to go after them and say, let's talk this through. I understand you're not hysterical. You have a genuine feeling that your dignity has been assaulted here, and I don't want to be in an institution where you feel your dignity is under attack. So how do we get to an honest conversation about that? We're still in the middle of this.
Okay, thank you. I would like to invite you now to ask questions to Professor Ignatieff. Please, when you get to the microphone, introduce yourself and be short and concise to give others a chance to. Okay, here's the first.
Thank you so much for your talk. I have a two-folded question. The first part. Beg your pardon.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Helmo Pape, and I'm trying to introduce the discussion about the universal basic income here in Austria. Okay. So my first question would be regarding your university issues and Viktor Orbán. Would you say is Viktor Orbán and his party members general in dislike of universities? And if not, how are other universities, I'm not aware of how many there are in Hungary, are they loyal to your position? Are they making a petition or something to support your point? And the second part of the question, because the title of the talk is the struggle for academic freedom, I would like to ask your view on if economic motives are hijacking the science business in general, because you have more and more pressure to produce something that is, quoting, productive. Thank you.
To the first question, we've had very substantial support from other academic institutions, and that's beyond praise because all of them are state dependent. They're dependent on state funding, and so when they have to step up, they're taking a risk, which I deeply appreciate. To the second question, I think that is an issue about academic freedom. I think every university has to have very clear protocols about the conditions under which it accepts research funding, and not just from corporate sources, but from philanthropic sources and in turn from government sources. Academic freedom is on the line every time you take money from any source. And so I would, we work with this constantly. We spend a lot of time on contracts trying to make sure we're not going to get caught in making sure, for example, that we have the right to publish anything we want in any circumstance, regardless of the funding source. And this is an active issue. You'll be aware that an American medical school recently got into a huge controversy in which they appeared to be in a contractual relationship with that utterly compromised their academic independence. So yes, that would be, add that to my list of the threats to academic freedom. They're threats from the state. They're menaces inside. We're not defending a pluralist space well enough. We're contributing to the inequality problem, and this is another one, particularly salient in the big research universities.
So isn't CEU, a private university, charging high tuition fees to its students,
No.
also contributing to this to inequality, offering elite education?
I'm about to say something flippant, and I hope you understand I'm making a joke. If only we were charging high tuition fees. We have some of the most generous financial support of any university in the world, thanks to our conditions. 84% of our master's and doctoral students receive some form of financial assistance. It's a model we're proud of, but it ain't easy to keep it going.
Any hands in the back? Okay, please.
I have a question about the students.
Can you just introduce yourself, please?
Oh, I'm Manu Radhakrishnan. I have a question about the students who walked out when Roger Scruton came. You obviously tried to defend a pluralistic space, but what was their counter-argument? I found the whole spectacle a little dispiriting, because one can see that there's idealism, but on the other hand, if you don't hear what someone you don't like is saying, you can't formulate your own counter-response.
Well, that's the kind of thing I said back to these students. I think it's about dignity. They want to say, listen, we are gay men and women. This is more than a sexual preference or a gender preference. This is who we are. And this guy gets up, and we give him a prestigious university platform to talk at us, and you are legitimizing this derogation, this attack on our dignity. And it's difficult to argue around that. If you feel that your dignity is attacked when someone says something to you, it's a little difficulty. I mean, how am I supposed to say to them, actually, your dignity is not in question at CEU? That's what I do say. I mean, this is a pluralistic community. You're entitled to full respect. A university cannot assault or infringe the dignity of any of its members. That's what it means to be in a community of scholars. And they say, well, the way you've got to prove that to me is by barring certain people whose opinions I don't like, right? You see what I'm... So this is where we are, and it's a global phenomenon in the sense that students pick this up from other places. And that, I think, suggests that, again, the duty of a university is always to say to its students, to its staff, and its faculty, think. Think. Let's think this through together. And sometimes, I don't mean to be disrespectful to them, I think they didn't think hard enough about this. They made a claim that was kind of in the air, as it were. They picked it up, but I'm not sure they could fully justify it. And if they can't justify it in a university, then they got to sit down and listen to somebody.
think over there.
Hi, my name is Damita Presley. I'm a journalist, and it's not so much a question as a comment to you and also the previous person who asked the question. I think that the line that you're drawing in terms of whether someone advocates violence or not as a decisive factor as to whether or not to invite them, I think that's a very low bar that you're setting, with all due respect. I think that you said that the students who walked out didn't think enough, but I think that it's very difficult as a male in such a privileged position to really feel what these people must have been feeling, that when someone is on stage who respects you as a human being less because of your gender or because of your orientation, I don't think that you can ask any human being to sit and listen to a person with those opinions. I think that's too much to ask, and I don't really see what is unclear about someone standing up and leaving when they're feeling attacked in their humanity by someone else's opinions. It's as simple as that.
Well, that's an important claim about respect, and I guess what I'm asking is whether respect is actually in play here. In the talk that Roger Scruton gave, there was no utterance of any kind that expressed disrespect to anybody. It was a defense of a conservative political philosophy in context. That's just the context. What they were objecting to were things they found online that he had said 5-6 years in the past. I framed the presentation of Mr. Scruton in such a way as to say he was here to present. It was a particular debate in political philosophy. I framed it in that terms. I made it clear that inviting him did not amount to a broad-based approval of everything he'd ever written. No university can give that guarantee. You're using the term respect and attack in a way that, if those are the terms, then I'm not sure we can hear anybody we disagree with, because at a certain point, disagreement is a fundamental issue. But it is not, in my view, an issue of respect. And it is also not the case that I, as a person in authority, can't adjudicate that question because I'm a white elderly male. We can't run institutions unless the authority of the institution, its commitment to plural debate, is valid irrespective of the biographies and identities of the person who have the authority in the institution. I mean, I accept an obligation to listen to every member of the community, hopefully with respect. But if the conversation is telling me, you can't possibly know what I feel about anything because you're a heterosexual white male, it's difficult to maintain a university at all under those premises, especially a university that has people from every religion, every faith, every gender orientation on earth. We have got all God's children in the room. And we can't have a free institution if persons' perspectives are invalidated. That is, you cannot understand what I feel and what I'm saying simply because of who you are. That takes us into with respect to what I'm trying to engage with you as seriously as I can, because you're mounting a real challenge to what I'm saying, and I take it seriously. I just respectfully disagree.
I think, there was a question. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Alex Ratzener. I'm former head of information systems at the Bank for International Settlements and an alumnus of the London School of Economics. There is a big debate going on about equality and equality of access, equality issues. You've raised them very much at the beginning of your talk. And my question is, how do you see the role of a university that on the one hand is trying to form an elite that is going to go out in the world and lead, and reconcile that with the narrative of equality? What kind of equality do you tell your students they are going to form after they leave?
I hope I won't be heard as being complacent when I say I'm an elitist egalitarian. You know, that is, I'm a radical egalitarian in the sense that I think one of the facts about human beings is that talent, ability is distributed right across the human set. And any university, any institution with a brain in its head wants to recruit and seek from the entire human set. Everybody on board. That's the egalitarianism. It's a kind of human egalitarianism. But it's elitist in the sense that some institutions are better than others. And institutions have to set their standards very high. The things that have shaped and formed me, and I'm sure this is true of many people in the room, have been in institutions which were asking absolutely everything I had. And half of the time I was, excuse my language, shit scared. Didn't think I could measure up. Scared I would fail my graduate exams at Harvard. Failed I wouldn't get my thesis approved. Failed I wouldn't get, the anxiety of being in these institutions, frankly, has been very good for me. I'm not always measured up, and my life is not a story of unsullied success, but I damn well know that it has made me who I am. These institutions, for all their faults, have a relentless commitment to quality and excellence, which is just extremely valuable, and they must fight back at anybody who attempts to tamper with their attempts to set the standards. But having done that, they've got to be as egalitarian as they possibly can. Now, let me tell you, to be honest, about what troubles me about my institution. I think because we have extremely generous financial aid, and we try to be as rigorous as we can, thanks to some of the great faculty in this room. The problem we've got is that our model was we would provide graduate education of a world-class character to people and countries and regions who never had access to it before. That's why we were set up. What we notice is that they come to Budapest from Azerbaijan, from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from Sudan, from South Sudan, from Yemen, from Nigeria, from Ghana. Fabulous. Makes me proud just to see them, and they do a wonderful job. They never go back. So the guilty conscience I have about my institution is that we are contributing in our little way to the draining out of quality people from the societies who desperately need people to go back. And this is a phenomenon in university education around the world. It's not just that we're not giving a chance for world-class graduate or university education to people at the bottom of our own distributions, our social distributions. But when we do offer it to people from countries around the world, it's their ticket out and they don't come back. So we may be contributing to some of the problems that these societies have. And we need to be honest about that. We need to, I can't get a wonderful student from the Yemen in the middle of a civil war and say, young man, you've got to go back to Yemen. He says, I want to go to Vienna, I want to go to Frankfurt, I want to go to London, and you're my ticket to get there. So whatever you do here, you've got to be honest about what your institution is actually doing, and this is a troubling aspect of what we do.
Do you see this problem? Is it also happening in Hungary? Do you see some of the best minds leaving, also because of the atmosphere?
Well, it's just a fact that 500,000 Hungarians are working in the Schengen area, The country is losing a tremendous amount of talent because these people are not coming back to Hungary. And that's a general aspect of EU accession, which we haven't talked about enough, which is the often catastrophic demographic impact, particularly in the most talented ends of the age distribution, right across Central and Eastern Europe.
We would have time for another question. I don't see any other hands, so we'll take this one.
Mattis, my name. I have a question, I have more or less a statement. I think what we've heard so far was about justice and dignity and some metaphysics. And I think what we also discussed here was what makes authority, how do we construct expertise and authority in the 21st century? And what lies at the heart of that question is, maybe rather than dignity or justice, is equality in terms of economic equality. For example, Karl Marx wouldn't have been an authority, an expert for Engels if he wasn't there to support him. So I think what lies at the heart of many of these problems and things we discuss is economics and economic equality. Thank you.
I think the question of intellectual authority is crucial, and I wouldn't want to minimize the economic factors that you mentioned. God bless Friedrich Engels. I think that's an important point. But I think there's another problem, which is the public sphere of liberal democracies is facing the most serious epistemological crisis that I remember in my lifetime. I've never been in a liberal democratic public sphere in which it is easier now to say, you have your facts and I have mine. That's fake news. The willful, sometimes vicious ways in which political leaders of various kinds are challenging the authority of reality itself, and in the process radically devaluing the status and authority of experts is I think at the limit, a genuinely frightening phenomenon. Some of it is a course correction that needed to happen. To go back to the Brexit case, we're tired of experts, that stuff. If you were turning on the television any time between 1965 and 1995, and it was British television, and I know a little bit about this, somebody would come on and be validated as an expert by the BBC or ITV or one of the networks, and he would then talk about Sunderland. He would talk about the conditions in a northern industrial town. And if you were in Sunderland, you thought, who the hell is this guy? Do you know what I mean? So there has been a course correction of rebellion against that kind of expertise validated by the media and validated by universities, which I think was overdue. What do you know? Ordinary people were asking, this is my reality you're talking about. And you're talking about it, and because you have a PhD, you get on the screen, and I never do. And universities have to acknowledge that there's been a kind of rebellion against that media-validated expertise that I think was a good thing. But it has now gone to the point that nobody believes anybody when they have facts. I mean, because there are some facts about Sunderland. Sunderland makes cars for Nissan. All of the cars made by Nissan in that factory are sold in Europe. Those are facts. That's not, we didn't make that up, right? You can go to the factory and that will be proven to be true. So if you're going to have a debate about what the consequences of Brexit for Sunderland are, it is a fact that that factory will probably have to close because the market will become impossible, right? So if we're going to have a public debate about is Brexit good for Sunderland, that's a fact that matters. And if we can't have a public debate validated by facts of that kind, we will not have a democracy very quickly. And I think that's what I mean by the epistemological crisis. And the university is front and center. And we have to ask how we can contribute to a public debate without being a bunch of charlatans or whores. I use my words advisedly. One of the temptations of intellectual life is we get invited on the television to be experts, but we actually don't know anything about the question they're asking. But we're happy to be there because it's good for our careers, right? The discipline of sticking to what you know is what validates expertise. The minute you succumb to the temptation to start being an expert about Sunderland, which you've never actually visited, you begin to betray not just yourself and your own ethical rationale of academic life, you betray the whole profession. And we've got a lot of that. And so we've got to talk to ourselves about the ethics of what we do, because I think that's the only way in which we can legitimately restore our authority as contributors to public debate.
Well, it would be fascinating to continue talking about the post-factual society and all these issues that you just raised also in these comments. Unfortunately, our allotted hour is over, and you will have to leave too, Vienna. So I just want to thank you very much for this wide-reaching and very insightful comments, and for your attention and for your questions.